It is the Rotoballer PGA show for the FedEx St. Jude. And it appears that Spencer is sweating more in his own house/studio than Lucas Glover did at Memphis last year. The AC's out for our boy Spence, so we're getting in the Memphis mold here, Spencer. How are you outside of melting?
I'm doing well. I was joking to you before the show started. It's like I was very hot last week. It was nice to turn things around. And in the process, I've given up air conditioning. I had to sell a lot of items to get back on track. So this room is getting hotter by the second. We will make it through this show. Hopefully we can have a nice, exciting show. There's a lot to talk about this week, but definitely hot on my end right now, Byron. Picks last week and the temperature inside this room.
Listen, people, if you don't think that Rollerboarder PGA is out here sacrificing literal sweat, and tears for you guys, Spencer's out here busy saunaing himself to make sure that we can bring you guys the juicy, good bits that we're going to be chatting about at the FedEx St. Jude this week. So you had a great week last week, Spence. That's great to hear. Chat to the people. Like, who was you're like the core of your card that kind of brought it home for you?
We've talked a lot on this show about, I guess I'll call it my inability pre-tournament to put the right names on, like Vegas, Xander, Bobby Mack, Davis Thompson. There's been a lot of really close calls of like the name that missed my card. And we always talk about when you build exposure out, depending on how you build it, you either have room when the in-tournament bets come in, or you don't have room if you overexpose yourself. And I'm never going to be somebody that chases in a lot of these spots, or any of these spots, I should say. So I built a little bit of a smaller card of exposure last week, made the same error of keeping Aaron Wright off the card, but got him 18-1 on Friday night, was able to hit that for 3.6 units. And then 4-1 in the matchup markets. I double faded Bobby Mack. I had Griot in a fade. My whole reason for fading Griot was if he makes the cut. We want to talk about travel and players that have gone back and forth, which was not something that I necessarily thought was an issue for most players. Griot had made that trip back and forth multiple times to where he went down to go play the Scottish and the Open. He came back to play in America. He went back to play the Olympics. He came back to play last week. He hasn't taken a week off, so I wasn't shocked to see JJ Spawn
play well,
move up the leaderboard, Griot to move backwards, and then ended up fading, I guess, the two big ones for me that were the two biggest wagers I had. Ben Griffin plus 140 against Akshay. Pretty easy showing there with Akshay missing the cut. And then Eric Cole over Justin Rose. Justin Rose ended up missing the cut also. So it was a nice week to get back on track. It's been a slow burn, I would say, for the past 2.5 months, but it's what we always talk about on this show, Byron. It's like 1 week of positive results all of a sudden doubles where I was at this year. Like, it had gone down and now it's doubled back up to where I was. So you just need a couple of those results to really start pushing in the right direction. And hopefully, as we move here to the FedEx St. Jude and throughout the playoffs, it's going to be a couple tournaments that I know this, like 70-man, 50-man, 30-man type fields have problems on the back end of it. And we can discuss of what that does for placement markets and outrights and matchups and everything of that nature. But I still think there's value to be found, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, especially in the matchup side of things, because you can have a tournament of two people and have a matchup, if it checks out. So we've got the guys in the chat. We've got our Rotoballer Discord repping pretty hard. Yeah, we get to see Ed, Brian, and Jens doing their thing. Thank you all for tuning in, folks. If you haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe over to the Rotoballer Fantasy Sports channel over there on YouTube, and give that tweet that we have going on X a nice little like too. I had Spencer, Siwoo Kim, Kurt Kitayama, Akshay, Cameron Davis, Cameron Young, Sungjae Im. Like, those are all premier talents in the field, and I had them for respective bets. Half of them missed the cut. Cameron Young has got a mental block, buddy, that he needs to just sit in your room for like 2 days and just let whatever wax and crap is built up in his brain melt away, because on a round 4, Spencer, it's not even a day, it's the round, because he played fine on Sunday morning and then Sunday afternoon shows up and an ejection quicker than NASA. It was just 4 over in 4 holes. I think he had multiple 3 putts. It was terrible. But hey, we're not here to bitch. We had to encourage Billy Horschel, my outright last week, to keep on letting other guys win tournaments. Be there for them when they need you most, Billy, because I went to you at 25-1 and I expected nothing better than you to be Aaron Rye's personal hype guy down the stretch. So I appreciate that from you too, Billy. Rough week for me, Spencer. I just had a feeling with the weather and stuff, it was just going to be that way. Sometimes you just got to take your chill ball, but it is what it is. Let's get to the FedEx St. Jude. Let's sweat our tails off a little more there with you. What are you most looking forward to here? What's your distinguishing factor in the models? High level, what are you distinguishing yourself with?
At its core, I think this is a really straightforward par 70 property. It's going to accentuate ball striking. We've seen that come to fruition 9 times over the past 12 years when looking into the winner of the event being the one who has led the field in strokes gained tee to green. You're going to have these narrow zoysia grass fairways that help enhance that metric, since thick Bermuda rough creates a secondary penalty beyond just the 11 holes that are going to feature water. I think that zoysia conversation, Byron, is the most notable piece here for me because you get this really stark contrast of what happens when a ball is in the fairway and what happens when it's in the thick Bermuda rough. Zoysia, for anybody who doesn't know, and there's a couple tournaments a year that have zoysia grass, and you can probably speak of this a little bit better than even I can, of being somebody who's played golf. Zoysia has the propensity and the makeup to make your ball sit up on the fairway. It's almost like it's perched up. And so when you're looking at a perched up shot on a second shot course to begin with versus missing a fairway, potentially finding water, potentially finding Bermuda grass, thick Bermuda grass, and if you find the Bermuda grass, there's water that can still come into play. To me, this was one of those venues that accentuated the need to find the short grass off the tee. And then on top of that, how could you handle your second shots? And the range that you're going to be looking for this week, you're going to hear it on all shows. It's 125 to 200 yards. Nearly 67% of second shots occur from that distance. That's a total that's almost 12% higher than what golfers face weekly. I think you can merge in a lot of second and third metrics into the mix there. Like, I did look at putting. Any time that you get a course, then we start talking about tee to green production. What ends up happening in those spots is one, putting gets decreased just from the natural expectation of it. And two, it enhances the ball striking that's needed. So that's here, find the short grass, hit your approach shots well from 125 to 200. I guess, though, for me, that where I've maybe made it a little bit different than some people, just because you're going to hear over and over again, tee to green, tee to green, tee to green. And that was 90% of the conversation that I just had right now. I did throw putting into the mix. I did it as a different outlook. I didn't run it from a strokes gained total perspective. Like it's usually 30 to 35% of my statistical weight is expected strokes gained total. Instead, I ran 30% this week for expected tee to green production. And then I added on all these outside factors, Bermuda putting, fast Bermuda putting. I looked at opportunities created. That's going to be iron play and the expected likelihood that somebody's going to make a putt. That's something that I've talked about on shows quite a bit in a lot of these spots where, find me the player who's going to create the most opportunities and then the one who's also going to make the most putts from there. It doesn't mean I'm grabbing the best putter. It means I'm grabbing the one that's going to give himself the most chances. And so, all of that is built into my model. If you have access at Rotoballer, you can get all of that information. It's specific categories that you can weigh. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Byron. I would assume it's going to be a lot of overlap there because it is a very straightforward course at the end of the day. But did you do anything on your end to make it different?
Not particularly, Spence. I think I'm going to be using a bit more poor shot avoidance than good shot rate because I don't really care about you knocking it super close this week. I care about you missing the water that's going to be around you. And I think that's where the best ball strikers really thrive is kind of just if you miss by a 2-yard distance short of the green, you're in the water versus going down a false front or something like that. So I think kind of just making sure that I have guys that are really in control of their golf ball when it comes to approach and off the tee this week is going to be important. But you pretty much covered all of what I needed to chat about, and I'm totally cool with that. So we got guys asking about Scotty Scheffler. Let's actually chat about this right off the bat. Yeah, I've got Scotty number 1 in my models and in number 2. There's no, I mean, what do you have? Spence 1 and 2 there too as well.
I have, depending on how I ran it, I have 1 and 3 in 2 different ways of how it was put together. So overall, Scotty won. When I ran it for upside, Xander was 3rd only. From an overall rank, Morikawa actually surpassed Xander. And I think it's going to show in the ownership. Morikawa is probably the safest player on the board. From an upside perspective, this is kind of going to be the spot where I get different this week. I really like Ludwig Oberg, and I don't think the market is going to in general. Some of the upside metrics that I had in my model for, we talked about this at the Olympics. What I've been trying to find, like specifically for DFS and also inside of the outright betting board, we know Xander and Scotty have had a stranglehold over the PGA Tour for the last 6 to 8 months, pretty much the entire season, where they're just going back and forth. And what I'm trying to find in my model is, can I find the golfer who is either supposed to be next to them in the price, or if not, that got a reduction in price in either the outright market or with their price on DraftKings that was lower than it should have been, to where there's now value that enters the mix. Everybody, and rightfully so, and I don't want this to become an anti-Colin thing. I just said he's 2nd in my model. Everybody's going to want, if you're going to try to have a salary saving route, they're going to go to Morikawa. My model seems to think that the real contrarian route here is Ludwig. And it doesn't mean that you cannot play Ludwig with one of the top guys. It doesn't mean that you can't start with Ludwig. There's a lot of different routes to go here. I think the top of the board in general, from $10,000 and up, I don't have anybody that is a natural fade candidate for me. Sometimes we come on this show and there's just obvious choices that I'd really want no exposure to for the week. I didn't look at this board and naturally find anybody that I wanted to take on. Ownership is going to tell a big picture. There's going to be spots where I'm going to be less bullish than others. I'm still trying to find who is the golfer who's closest to those top 2 names. And when Oberg opened, I mean, he got up to 25 to 1 at some books out there. He's in the low $10,000 section. He's the number 1 player for me when you take that opportunities created and then you add the expected make rate. And part of that reason is that Scotty's not there is just because Scotty doesn't, quote unquote, make enough putts. Scotty's creating the most opportunities, but I don't know. I think it's a really unique spot for Oberg here, where the market seems to be too low on him.
Spencer, I love thinking about him on courses like this. If you think about the RSM Classic, not tons and tons of water around there, but a claustrophobic kind of a venue, like a 7,200 yard past 70, past 71, where guys have to club down, but Ludwig is so accurate off the tee and so total that he can continue to hit driver. I don't know if there's going to be water that requires him to hit short of, but he's definitely capable of threading the needle through tight fairways. And I think if he can find his game again, especially on a Sunday, Spencer, the biggest issue with him lately is, and it's we've seen it with Rye and things like that, where guys have typically gone slightly backwards or get stuck in neutral. Ludwig's becoming a big problem on Sundays now. It's just whenever he wakes up for round 4, it's just going backwards. And that's my biggest concern with him. That can easily change in one Sunday. Maybe he's a little further back and has to chase down versus being in the front and feeling a little nervy. You never know. I think Rye was in the perfect position last week to he was never a front runner ever. He was leading that tournament for 1 hole at the end of it, basically, all said and done. So that's kind of a great way the cards broke, and I think is going to need Ludwig to have a similar kind of fate. But man, he's grading out statistically really well. I bet him to win 2 or 3 weeks ago, like at similar numbers. So I like him a lot, but man, he's just been frustrating on Sundays.
Let me ask you a question really quickly before we move past this section. And maybe this ends up being help for anybody who's trying to make lineup decisions. Maybe this pushes people out of this range. Maybe it pushes people into this range. It's kind of just an open-ended question, but let's remove Scotty and Xander from the mix for 1 second and then just say the rest of this tournament is what you're looking at. I understand the Oberg discussion that he's not closing the deal. And I think it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, that he's given himself a lot of opportunities, which is the same thing that frankly, Colin Morikawa has done in a lot of spots too, where he's flirting around that first page of the leaderboard. He's right near the top of some of these majors, and then the wheels fall apart. If you take those top 2 guys off the board, who do we really trust in this tournament to close? Like that's where the problem comes into play. Is everybody has the Oberg problem. There's so many golfers that I like this week, and we'll talk about a lot of them as we move down. And even guys like, I like Wyndham Clark this week.
I was going to say that's my guy I trust.
Yeah, like nobody's going to want to play him because of the form, but like that might be theoretically the next name of like true win equity if he gets himself into contention, because you have so many options of Morikawa, Fleetwood, Cantlay, Hovland. I like Hovland this week. Hovland's been nowhere to be found this season. I like Hideki. We'll have a conversation about Connors. My model loves Connors. I don't know what the true win equity is. I think he's one of the safer targets on the board. And if we're talking safety and cash game, and like I bet him in a head-to-head matchup against Tony Finau, that's kind of the route that I'm going to try to get exposure to him. I just don't know what golfer can win when we get rid of the top 2. And at the end of the day, if it's not Scotty or Xander, which probability would still suggest that it's not going to be, they're not more than 50% to win.
Yep.
Somebody's going to have to buck the trend. Which one of these names is the one that gets themselves across the finish line? And if you can figure out what that answer is, it's probably where you start finding the value on this board.
Yeah. And I think I have not, you know what, Spencer, just looking at when I haven't bet anyone outside of 150 to 1 name that we'll get to here shortly, but I think Wyndham Clark has to go on the card. I'm assuming he's 100 to 1 or something ridiculous again. So I think at this price, $7,900, you know, I've got him ranked 7th for upside, 20th for safety though. So like there's quite a big gap over there. If he doesn't shoot 4 over par in the first 4 holes of the freaking Olympics, no one else scored more under par than he did for the final 3 rounds. So he's got what it takes, you know, and he's playing solid golf, just struggling to string it together right now.
When I ran my model, even including what he did on day 1, taking the baseline expected short game statistics and the actual ball striking that he put together, and he worked himself to the bottom of the leaderboard. It couldn't have gotten much worse than he did in France. He was the expected 5th performer on the leaderboard that week. And funny enough, Byron, and I know you bet him, I believe you bet him at least at the Olympics. You had Oberg, correct?
I think so.
So
yes.
Scotty won the tournament. I know this is an outlandish answer I'm about to give. My model actually thought Oberg was the deserving winner of that tournament come Sunday when it ended. He blew up with his short game. And that's one of those areas where I'm always trying to take, yes, I run my data longer. We talk about it every single week, but I'm always trying to take my long-term data and then infuse it in with what a player's actually doing with their performances. But where you get the value is where the market is not reacting from the results that have been done. So like Morikawa is a really prime example on the flip side of that. Morikawa is getting all the respect in the world for every performance that he's put together. And Morikawa might go out and win this golf tournament. This is, once again, not an anti-Colin Morikawa segment here. But you have certain golfers like Oberg. You want to get much deeper down the board in Wyndham Clark. These are players that statistically are playing much better than the understanding seems to be right now from the public. And when that ends up being the case, you get drifts in numbers a little bit higher than they should be. To me, Morikawa and Oberg should be the same price on this board. That's part of the sentiment there is I like Morikawa. Like, I think they're very equivalent pieces that you're looking at. But one golfer's 14 to 1, give or take. One golfer's 25 to 1. One golfer's going to be 30% owned. One golfer's going to probably be sub 15. I mean, maybe a little bit more than that, but I'm always trying to find these ability points to find contrarian leverage. We talk about contrarian spots that we are creating leverage on pieces of our models that we like more than the general consensus. Like that's John Rahm at the Olympics. It's players that are top 5 projected performers for us that the market is ranking as if they're outside of the top 20. I think a lot of these names are going to fit that build over and over again. And at the end of the day, it is a 70-man field. at the end of the day, there is a lot of water that comes into play. And at the end of the day, there's an ability, I think, to find certain players like Clark, Oberg. I'm going to keep going down with this Hovland ship. Hovland actually gained strokes approach at the Olympics. He was a top 15 projected scorer. We keep talking about water at these facilities and how that enhances his ability to not necessarily get as undone by some of the short game stuff. Really easy green complexes, which is probably one of the things that we haven't discussed so far. An elite, like a truly elite putter of the high-end golfers when he has his best stuff at the end of the day. Can he put it together? That's the question. But when we start getting these drifts where Clark gets close to triple digits, Hovland starts getting to 40 to 50, Oberg gets to 25, and everybody wants to bet Tom Kim and Colin Morikawa and Corey Connors and Russell Henley. Like, I understand those 4 names are 4 of the 6 safest players on the board. If I'm creating cash game builds, they're a staple of lineups. Like, I'd love to have head-to-heads with them. I think I'm going to get top 10, top 15 finishes. Do I really want to bet that, though, or do I really want to play those over the top when they're 35% ownership, where I have equivalent players that are a third of the popularity?
Amen, baby. And I think, Spence, we keep bashing through this point that you don't want to just pivot to pivot. You want to pivot to things that you find yourself having an edge on. And we do in these instances, like I just bet Wyndham Clark 65-1 on the show. We are going. So I got my second outright going on here. I'm very close to pulling the trigger on Ludwig. If it just makes sense, it will make sense. But at 20, I'm only seeing a 22 out there at the moment. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But
Bookmaker has 25 for anybody who has access to that. I do think with a lot of these names, you will see drift in the market. Like, do you have Bet ESPN?
Yes, I do, but I hardly ever use them. It's a very tough book to use.
I don't know if he's still available. Clark was 80-1 there. Maybe he's moved. I'm checking it right now for anybody. He's down to 60. So there's been some movement with Wyndham. So yeah,
65 at FanDuel still totally fine for me. I think that's cool to go to. I'll keep the Discord posted if we pull the trigger on Ludwig there. I'm tempted, Spence. Number 3 in the model for me. Upside wise, we've got lots to go off there. He's a stud, and he's 20-something-2 in a 70-man field. We'll see what he can do. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going. In the 9s, though. I know you've mentioned Corey Connors. I've got Corey Connors ranked 19th for upside, Spence at 12th for safety. We had a big discrepancy, and we can have a little bit of model combat here and kind of chat about Corey Connors. I know you're a big fan of him this week.
I love him for safety markets above anything else. I tried to figure out a way to get him onto an outright card. I didn't love the numbers. I mean, we're looking at a player that's won the same event twice, and outside of that doesn't seem to win golf tournaments. Like, the last I checked, this is not the Valero this week, and maybe he puts the pieces together, and maybe he does find a way to win, but this is a big boy field. I had him 7th for upside. I had him 3rd for safety. Some of the putting metrics, I guess, is what saved him, and that's a weird answer to give for Corey Connors because most weeks he's at the very bottom of my projections. Yeah. I'm always trying to find golfers that have an expected increase on a specific surface. It's not a massive increase from him, but he jumped inside the top 45, like just fringe inside the top 45 for expected putting. We have seen players come out here before and lose strokes putting and win the golf tournament. That is right within the recipe of success that feels more like a Scotty Scheffler answer, if we're being honest. Like, you still have to beat Scotty Scheffler at the end of the day, and that's what makes it tough, and you need to get those high-end marks that hit. But like I said, I bet him at -110 at Bet365 against Tony Finau. I'm going to be leaning towards any of the safer markets with him. I couldn't get myself there on an outright, but like, full disclosure, that's the same answer that I gave last week for Aaron Rai. And it was one of those things like, let's wait and see what happens after round 1. And Aaron Rai, even being 5 strokes down, jumped to the number 1 projected winner in my model. And he was 18-1. And that's where I ended up pulling the trigger on it. I'd like to see where Connors moves in my model. Probably the same answer for Morikawa. What price can we get after day 1? Those are probably the 2 names for me that I am most bullish on, because I still have a little bit of room to see where they move Thursday night or Friday night if I'm going to try to jump into the mix. But with Connors, I tend to agree with you. There's a general lack of upside in the profile that leaves a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, he's the only guy that's inside the top $8,000 price ranges that doesn't have a top 5 in the last 12 months, according to my stats. I might, it's probably right, but it's just like weird that he's been pumping out top 10s like crazy, but the top 5s have really the upside, like the ability to really get frisky with the leaderboard hasn't been there for Corey, but 12th ranked guy, for safety for me. So it checks out on both our fronts for that aspect of him. In the other ranges, yes, Spence, in the 9s, I'm a big fan of Russell Henley this week. I think he's been starting to really find himself inside the top 10 quite routinely lately. And it's interesting to see what he's up to, man. At 9 flat, at a golf course, it really suits accuracy off the tee, good, precise iron play, safe iron play. Russell Henley's that guy right now. And I think I'll be going to him quite often in the $9,000 range. Yeah,
I think he's a safe option. Also, there's some bunkers out here. They're relatively easy, but one of the better bunker players, one of the more accurate golfers, the iron play that you've talked about. There's a lot of boxes that he's going to check. I'll just go back to the Victor Hovland answer that I keep trying to have every single week. That's probably going to be the contrarian route that I'm really going to try to pull in on with some of my data that I have. You get a profile with him. If you want to talk about boom and bust commodities on the board, 20th overall, 5th for upside, 35th for safety. That's kind of, maybe that 35th number is even better than what we've seen recently. Like that's a better result than you would expect for him, but it's that high ceiling, low floor, probably sub 10% option that has drifted out to 40-1 in the outright market, to where I'm going to take my shots with Hovland in outright markets and markets that are a little bit more boom or bust.
Spencer, that's where you take your shot at him. You're not trying to bet Hovland top 20 here. Like he's not providing you with that kind of reliability. What he does is if he figures his shit out, Hovland is one of the most talented golfers. He almost won this thing last year. I vividly remember who I was on last year. Patrick Cantley, Victor Hovland. They were both right around the top of the board, just couldn't get it home because, Lucas Glover boxed them out like a, 10-year NBA veteran. But I guess they couldn't get close enough because he was so damn sweaty, kind of like you getting over there in your room. But you know what, Spence? That's okay. Ed is asking about Cantley and Davis Thompson being interesting plays. So what's your take on Cantley? And then let's dive into the Davis Thompson situation.
I'd like to see where the Cantley ownership ends up landing. We keep getting these spots with him, and it's almost the same sentiment that I have every week. It's where the price tag is probably a little bit too high. When the ownership doesn't follow, he's usually in that range for me where there's potential leverage that can be created. I've heard his name mentioned a lot this week.
Yeah,
that would be my concern if now all of a sudden you have a high-priced Cantley. I think he's safe in general for what you're getting. I would probably rather shoot for the moon in certain spots with it, but I kind of seem to believe, or my models seem to believe for the most part, that any of these names, $9,000 and up, depending on exactly how I built it, they had general playability one way or another. Some I wanted to play more for upside markets, some I wanted to use more for safety. Where I really started to get the deviations from what I was looking for were the $8,000 and below golfers, to where I started having golfers that I wanted to take on in matchups. I wanted to have zero exposure to on the board, that I'm fine if they beat me. I'd like to see where ownership lands on a lot of these 9,000 and up guys, because I don't have such a bulletproof strategy at this moment until we get a little bit more criteria that enters the mix.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Spence. And I think, you can pick apart all of them in the 9s. You can also give a good reason for everybody in the 9s. I think that's kind of where we're finding ourselves. Before we get out of the 9s, I do want to mention I have bet Scotty Scheffler minus 125, minus 120 for a top 5. It's been one of my best markets with this guy. It's just top 5 Scotty at barely negative odds. And then Xander Schauffele for a top 10 at minus 130. He has been clipping top 10s at a 65% clip. Minus 130 is a 57% implied probability in a 70-man field. So we'll see what these guys can do. Haven't typically played well yet, but they are two of the most informed golfers on the planet right now. And I don't think there's any golf course that would be able to silence either of them when they're playing the way they are right now.
Really quickly, before we get out of this section, is there anybody else that you either like or dislike?
I dislike Tommy Fleetwood quite severely. At $9,800, he doesn't rank better than 17th for safety, 22nd for upside. He's getting a massive ding. It's, I don't know what his deal is. He's just lacking ball striking, I guess. I don't know, Spence. I just struggled to find love for Tommy Fleetwood, despite what he looks like, despite what he's given us statistically. What about you?
So the two golfers that have very similar builds in my model, we'll go back to the Cantlay discussion very quickly, but Fleetwood and Cantlay kind of got built out in very similar fashions to where the safety numbers were better than the upside. The price tag was too high. I'd like to see where the ownership ends up landing on both of them, but I would probably give a double down answer to that, to where with any amount of ownership, I will be out because I do think the price tag is too high. For me, though, the one name that I am going to want exposure to would be Hideki. I talked a lot about Hideki at the Olympics. I know he got the most out of those 4 rounds. A lot of the statistics in my model were skewed because of what he did with the flat stick. But even if you look at just the last 7 tournaments, he's gained in 5 of those events. 3 of those occurrences have helped him to land a top 10. I said at the beginning of the show, 9 of the last 12 winners in Memphis have led the event tee to green. Anything, and I truly mean anything that he can get with the putter this week, could legitimately propel him. And I know Hideki is not your man. This is not a guy who ever really finds his way onto DFS lineups or betting cards of yours. But I guess when push came to shove, and this is kind of what ended up happening in the outright market for me specifically, when I had to make decisions of what my model thought had more upside or who my model thought had more upside, that's where I landed with Hideki over Connors. That's where I pushed Hideki above Connors. I like Corey Connors this week. He's going to be extremely popular. I think there are ways to get different with golfers that have a little bit of a better profile, and Hideki is one of those names to where if we want to run under this belief that Hideki is now overpriced in the 9,000s, which is what some people start to do when he moves up the board, I will take this as a water course. Anytime Hideki has water that can enter the mix and he can accentuate those ball striking qualities, lower probably score. Also, usually get about a 15 under par winner. Not going to be looking at a 25 under winner. All those marks help Hideki have a little bit extra win equity at the end of the day.
I have Hideki 8th for safety, so that's a pretty solid ranking for me. I think this is the one I'm starting to come around on the guy. Did I expect him to gain more strokes than he's ever gained last time he played at the Olympics? No, but hey, for his country, you got to go shoot your shot. If you got to get it done one way or another. So he continued to ball strike it and kind of lost the putter as the week went along, but he still got that tee to green game to keep him at the top of the leaderboard without kind of flaking away. If the putter does show up like it has shown 2 or 3 times a tournament, that's ideal. What you're looking for from the Dexter. So I don't mind him this week.
One of the things I'm always, because you brought it up, I just want to mention it very quickly. One of the things I'm always trying to look for in my model when I run any of the baseline short game projections and I throw them into the mix, Hideki, yes, one of the big overachievers that you could find at the Olympics there. But where real fade candidates or real playable commodities come into play for me is when you have that massive divergence between the two numbers. A golfer who finishes 3rd in Hideki's spot who should have been 46th on the leaderboard. Situations like that. Hideki overachieved. He didn't overachieve by such a margin. He got himself a medal, so he gets the high-end mark on it that ends up showing, but he was still a top 15 projected player for me. I think sometimes, if you give Hideki, and this is where people need to maybe not be so harsh on the putting statistics when they're either really good or really bad, but specifically here where they're really good. Let's just give Hideki no putter that week, and let's just say he finishes what his baseline would be, a 14th place. I bet you people this week go, if Hideki has a putter, he can be better than 14th, rather than Hideki gained 1 million strokes at the Olympics. He's due for regression. Obviously, he's due for regression, but I also think that the ball striking was sound enough to where I don't want the putter to be the sole reason that somebody removes him from a lineup. There are other reasons to potentially remove him. Some of the weighted total driving statistics went in the wrong direction for me. There are other parts of the profile that were not perfect, but I did view this as a high upside play at the price. And hopefully, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, at a reduced ownership percentage.
Yeah, I think so because, Corey, you got him around there. You got Cantley. We played nicely last year. So lots to go off of, lots of guys to pivot to. We'll see what goes on. Doug, obviously, back in the mix here, saying, can Aaron Rye dominate down the stretch like Breece Hall will this fall? Let's go, Doug. Jets signing players, trading for players that don't even want contracts with the Jets. So that's how our season has begun. Hassan Reddick hanging around somewhere in China or something still. He hasn't showed up to one Jets drive yet. So Breece better be able to play defensive end as well, Doug. Otherwise, we're in trouble. Spence in the 8s. Oh, let's chat about Aaron Rye. I think he's in the 8s here anyway. Is someone going to make a quad and then 4-putt on the back 9 for him to win a tournament? I don't know, Doug. If he's anything related to the Jets, potentially. So, Spence, what was your take on Rye going back to back this week like Glover did last year? I mean, if there's a golf course that suits his skill set and typically his long-term lack of putting, which he's now found, this is the place, man. Accurate, ball striker, pound greens, pound fairways, get to minus 15. Hope someone for Jackson makes a quad.
You probably have this up in front of you. So like asking you this question is not necessarily like asking it to most people. I run it a little bit longer, but Aaron Rye over a 2-year running model inside of my model for strokes gained total. Where do you think he sits in this field?
Ooh, for 2 years?
Running 2-year model that is starting to be highly weighted towards this season. So like, it's not a pure 2-year model.
In this field, I think he's probably sitting in the mid-30s.
He is 6th.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of weight for this season that has pushed that up. But to give a perspective of that, number 1, Scotty Scheffler. Number 2, Xander Schauffele. Number 3, Rory McIlroy. 4, Colin Morikawa. 5, Ludwig Oberg. It's all the favorites of the tournament. Aaron Rye 6th.
Wow. See, I've got him 48th for 2024 season, like upside, 75th percentile strokes gained. So I kind of threw me off for a touch there, It's pretty bad for upside, but he's just recently, that's the full year, just recently he's really shown what he's capable of. And it makes a lot of sense, Spence. I should have tempered my expectations there a touch, but yeah. I love, do you think people will be going back to him, or do you think we're expecting some fall off after winning?
I haven't looked at any projected percentages from him. As a general rule of thumb, which is a really weird answer to give, I feel like people win golf tournaments of the Aaron Rye makeup, and then people don't want to play him again because he can't win 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
I think he's a nice price for all the reasons I just talked about. If people don't want to go back to him, like we're talking about another golf course where accuracy is at a premium. We're talking about a golfer who now seems to actually have the putting acumen to compete in these tournaments. My concern last week is how he handles a Bermuda complex. Well, he handled it well. He missed some putts down the stretch, but he handled it just well enough to win. So, there are players that the market is slow to move on. I think we might be in that spot with Rye here to where the market is just still not giving him the respect that he deserves.
Spencer, who in the $8,000 range are you not playing? I will be 1,000% honest with you and say I will not be playing Cameron Young. I cannot anymore with that man.
I kind of sort of like Cameron Young. I'd like to see where the ownership percentage lands, but I also have a sickness that I like to go back to players that nobody wants to play. Like, I mean, I've already mentioned Wyndham Clark and Victor Hovland and all the names that are on everybody's do not list every single week. I think he's interesting if nobody wants to play him. The name for me would probably go back immediately to the Finau conversation.
For you, Finau, huh?
I normally don't have that answer. Like my model always likes Finau and it always finds a reason to play him, but talked about betting Corey Connors against him in a matchup. he would probably be the number one option. I think from there, you have a lot of playable and interesting options. Cameron Young at 8,100, like, I would rather play him than a lot of guys in this section. I know that's like I guess a contrarian take there. I'll let you talk about Thagala. I like Thagala also, so I think he's a name to consider. I bet Justin Thomas in a matchup. Now, this might not be a DFS discussion to be had. The ownership might end up going up a little bit too high just because of his course history here. I bet him at -110 against Jason Day. So
I like that, Spence. Day just hasn't had it for 4 rounds at a time, man. And JT is playing solid. I got him ranked 11th here. So, I got Day 24th. So there's a definite edge there for you and me and the entire human race. So I would follow through on that for sure. I will be betting Sahith Thagala top 20 at +110. Let's party with him. And I've bet him 50 to 1 as well with 6 places each way at Bet Rivers, I believe, is where I found that this morning. Popped that in the Rotoballer Discord for the people over there to kind of have Seth finish second for us there again. So I'm a big fan, man. A pair of top 13 finishes here in his 2 appearances. He's got this propensity to kind of just spike and do his thing. He is one person that can win a golf tournament with his putter. He's also got the tee to green game to take this golf course apart as well. So I'll be looking at Sahith Thagala with beautiful big blue eyes as I click those bets going forward. Another name I'm a fan of this week, Spence, at $8,000 flat is Shane Lowry. Also some solid finishes at this venue in the past. It makes a lot of sense. If you think about how guys go about it, keeping it safe in the fairway, hitting the greens, missing the putts, that's exactly what Shane Lowry does. And every now and then he spikes with a putter too, so he can get himself right in the mix there at 8,000. Any other names you want to mention before we get out of here? Out of the eights?
No, I'll just very quickly rapid fire through some names that we've already talked about, I guess, because every week you can find this over in my Rotoballer article also. This is something that is included anytime I write the Monday article. I always look of players in my model that meet a certain threshold requirement in their statistics over whatever the number is. Here we have 70 players. I looked at the top half of the field. We could get a little bit more aggressive than that. There were 11 players in this $8,000 or up range that fit that requirement, that they were inside the top 35. It's a pretty large number. Like you sometimes when you break it down to half the people in the field, you don't get 11 people for an entire tournament. So to have 11 people fit from just this section, thought there were a lot of names. I will very quickly rapid fire through them. We don't need to spend any extra time on them, but Scheffler, Xander, Rory, Oberg, Victor, one of the reasons why I like Victor, Hideki, Connors, Henley, Thagala, Justin Thomas, Cameron Young. That's one of the reasons why I do like Cameron Young this week.
I love it, Spence. It makes sense. Cameron Young and the boys that we chatted about have what it takes. It's just the moments that matters most. They sometimes just tend to kind of crumble a bit. There's lots of people asking you about how Sungjae will be this week. Have we touched Sungjae? I think he'll be a little bit more popular than we expect. Anyway, after a poor performance last week, he's got 2 really good finishes yet. And, the last 2 times he's played, we got a 6th and a 12th at this venue. People are sluts for course history. And I think a 6th and a 12th for a guy that's $8,700 playing some really good golf. If you take away last week, it'll make a lot of sense that people go back to him.
Yeah, second safest player in my model in this $8,000 section. What always ends up scaring me in large field tournaments is when we start playing these quote unquote safe plays that carry over 20% ownership. We need a little bit of upside in these spots. I'd like to see where the ownership lands, but negative trajectory for upside, which I guess would be the concern there. But I think overall, I don't expect him to burn lineups.
Not like he did last week, What on earth did him and Cam Young both on that round 4 just went totally backwards. But anyway, we'll leave this godforsaken 8K range behind. Let's get into the 7s. My boy, Benny On, Akshay Bhatia, Seabears, all names that kind of possess different traits. Benny On, capable of pretty much dismantling any venue when he's in the mood. I think at $7,600, he's the only guy inside the 7K range that grades inside the top 10 for me. Big fan for upside on penny on for number 9. I might just bet him again at his current price.
I'll go with Wyndham Clark as a double down. Just really quickly with the Ben On conversation. My model was indifferent one way or another, but here's where I think you are correct with him, Byron. When I looked at Zoysia fairways and how players perform when given a Zoysia test in expected off the tee performance, he's 4th in my model this week. And he's a good driver of the ball in general. Like, he's inside of the top 20 for me to begin with. So I don't want to make it like he gets some massive improvement there, but that eclipses a lot of names. And it was one of the more significant climbers of the high-end options that I had on the board. Like him, Xander, Thomas, Rory, I guess. Like, those would be the 4 that, I mean, obviously Rory is going to be like a top 5 expected driver, but even specifically here, he saw a big increase. So, that's a name that we haven't even talked about yet. Like, there's a lot of playable commodities, and that's why I do think ownership, like all weeks, but even more so this week with a 70-man field, will be so important, because like the threshold differences from one player to the next in my model are super minute. You had the conversation about Henley. Like, Henley versus Connors to me is such a small discrepancy between those two golfers. My model likes Connors a little bit more, but that's one of those spots where, and it's not going to be this example, but just as an example, hypothetically, a player like Henley ends up being 5%, and a player like Connors will just go like ridiculous with it, ends up being 40%. Like, there's a way to get unique and different while pretty much taking the same quality player. That's really the only argument that I keep making here when I'm talking about ownership, because I think a lot of these players are very similar to one another.
It's the FedEx St. Jude Championship first playoff event. We've got playoffs mean the best players. We got the top 70 golfers on the PGA Tour minus Davis Riley, I guess. RIP to him, not making it through, I don't think. But we've got some really good golfers this week. So pivoting off of them is easier than it should be, because these are all options that are around them that are very accessible. So kind of play that ownership game, play it hard. We've only got 70 men in the field. When you find your value, when you find your edges, lean into them. Kind of with the girth and the strength of Sepp Straka on these Zoysia fairways. Big boy, lost to Willie Z in this venue 2 years ago. By the way, big fan of Will Zalatoris this week. I think his ownership will be super low. His ball striking numbers are finding their way back around. If he doesn't even need to putt well. He just needs to not lose 10 strokes putting this week. You know what I'm saying? So we can figure out what he gets up to, but I like him in the bottom of the 7, Spence. Anyone else you want to mention before we dive into the 6s?
I don't know who brought it up. I think Ed did. Davis Thompson. I like Davis Thompson quite a bit this week. It's another golfer that just continues to be underpriced in most of these tournaments. On the weaker fields, we see him jump into this $9,000 plus section. In some of these other tournaments like this, we continue to get these lower $7,000 marks. And my model at this point seems to believe Thompson is a legitimate top 30 golfer in the world.
He's incredible right now, Spencer. He's just playing so consistent golf. It's a sight to behold. And we've got Sweet Spot saying Zalatoris also needs to not have a broken back. Well, if you take a look at his metrics for the last little while, he's above average in distance off the tee now for a consistent probably 6 or so events. He's on record saying that his back feels 100% healthy. If you take a look at the ball striking numbers, they fine. It's the putting. And your back, your biggest issue comes when you're practicing putting, because you have to be in that position all the time. I understand. But at a venue that he's played well at, I'll take my chances on the greens with Willie Z, see what he can do. He's $7,000. You could potentially get a guy that's right in the mixture by accident at very minimal ownership, because no one wants to play the guy just yet. So I'm not going to claim that he's going to be fine. I'm always going to take a shot on his upside, though, especially when he's low end.
I have no take on him just because of the form. I think where you are correct, though. Every week I feel like I come on this show, Byron, and I say no Will Zalatoris, no to Will Zalatoris. But we also see him at, even in a lot of those tournaments, like 10 to 20% ownership. He's going to be sub 5%. He's been so horrendous. I'm not going to play him because I'd rather see him return and be back. I guess no pun intended there, but this is probably just from a close your eyes and forget what the model says, like the most inclined I would ever be. I'm still not going to do it, but this isn't the week I'm talking people necessarily out of it like all other weeks.
Yeah, and the ownership is not going to be where it is now if we get 2 tournaments of Will Zalatoris back to being what he was. He's not going to be 7,000. He's not going to be 2%, 5%, whatever he's going to be this week. He's going to be $8,500, 15% owned at the big boy venue. So we'll see what he gets up to. It's not a lock or a certain play that I have. It's a contrarian play that is kind of just a little sprinkle him in there if you're in the mood. In the sixes, though, Spence. Flop lag City on Davis Cameron. Cameron Davis let us down last week at a venue that he typically, should have thrived at. He was tee-degreeing golf courses to pieces, shows up, doesn't get it done for us. So $6,800 at a golf course that should suit his game quite nicely. He's a very good option when it comes to these layoff venues. Played nicely here last year to get himself into the BMW Championship. So does he get it done again? And who else are you looking for in the six adjustments?
Let me ask you this, because you seem to be somebody who's on this golfer. I'm never on him, but you're definitely on him more than I am. Do you have thoughts on Erik van Rooyen this week?
I thought I was going to read your mind there. Yeah, I'm a fan. He's $6,400. Got him 35th and 33rd in the model. So he's up there. Played nicely. I think in 2020 he had a 7th place finish at the World Golf Championship at this venue. I think it's his first opportunity to play in this tournament. He's played well enough to be here. I love him. And I like South Africans on the Zoysia. I feel like we play on Kikuyu. I don't know how similar it is, but I want to say that the translation and the transition to Zoysia from Kikuyu is pretty solid. So give me Van Rooyen. I know he doesn't have the absolute ball striking pedigree we want, but his putter has been sensational, and that can solve all problems, especially at $6,400. You're not asking for the world from the guy.
I bet him in a matchup. We moved it quite heavily, and now the market seems to be moving aggressively back in the other direction. I took Van Rooyen plus 125 against Adam Hadwin. Can blame Data Golf for now pushing this back in the other direction, but a little bit of a play against Hadwin, a little bit of a play on Van Rooyen maybe being undervalued. I guess to go back to the Zalatoris conversation, the name for me, if I was just going to throw a dart, not necessarily trusting the data and hope I can find a high-end performer, I kind of liked Patrick Rogers. My model didn't necessarily, but at 6,100, the one mark that caught my eyes more than anything else, he was the number 1 off the tee expected producer with Zoysia fairways.
Okay.
That is like, we always talk about when you get into these low-end options, they have these profiles that are going to look wonky, hit and miss from every single area. You're trying to hold on to 1 or 2 different qualities that you believe can have a high-end mark to it. That is the dart throw at sub 3-4% over Zalatoris, where I would take Rogers there. Sure. Like, that's like when we always put out that section and people do it of like the golfer I'm backing that you should not be. The answer is Patrick Rogers this week. Okay. He's 59th in my model. There are massive concerns that still enter the mix, but he had some high-end numbers there. I think it's fine considering going back to Ben Griffin. Anytime on Bermuda, we see increases from him. Model liked Maverick McNeely a little bit. Mm-hmm. Jaeger and Hughes had value. That's about where I'm looking right now for value without having ownership thrown into the mix, though.
Yeah. Did you mention Ben Griffin? I feel like he's...
Ben Griffin on Bermuda, anytime you get him there.
Yeah, Bermuda Benny doing his thing. I would be remiss if I never mentioned Austin Eckroat, looking like his ball striking could potentially get the job done at a venue like this. And my man, Mackenzie Hughes, just leaning on the putter. I mean, he is the best putter in this field. So whatever that's worth, he's $6,200. If he has a crazy good week, he could lose 8 strokes tee to green and gain 14 putting. Like, this is what this guy's capable of. So that's an exaggeration. Hopefully it's only 7 tee to green and 15 putting. I'm just also kidding there, but sounds like you got camels running around in the back there, Spencer. Or any other Arabian animals entering that in the room yet?
No, it's I mean, this is starting. I might be over 100 degrees in this room at this point. Like I'm pretty impressed with myself that we've maintained it as well as we could. And I have this big bright light on me also on top of everything else, which is just radiating heat off of it. But no, the thing with Hughes, just like as a last closing note with him, we always talk and I always say like I'm either completely in on Hughes or completely out on him. I think he's an interesting target this week just because of that putting upside that he has that you talked about. There's real top 10, top 15 upside that comes in with that profile. And when I talked about it with Rogers, like it's the same thing with Hughes with the putter. It's just that one quality that you can find where if a golfer can be one of the best players in the tournament with that part of their game, that's how they can work themselves up the leaderboard and potentially give you a better finish than what you would expect them to. So that's the skill set I'm looking for now. I'm done with the Tom Hoagie game. I never get him right, but like Tom Hoagie and his irons would be the other route with it if we want to just keep going across the board of players that have a high-end skill set. But I seem to get Hoagie wrong every single time I'm ever on him.
Yeah, I've got him ranked 21st year right now, upside wise, but just taking a look at what he's been up to recently, I'm out. I can't do what he seems to have lost the plot. So as we get out of here, Spencer, your 100-degree Fahrenheit, your camel in the middle of the Egyptian desert play. Who is going to be leaving Sunday in Memphis, hotter than Memphis itself? Who's your guy? Who's the scorching flame on man this week for you? One guy, can be any range.
I'm going to say Ludwig Oberg wins this golf tournament. So I'll go with him. I never quite play by the rules. I definitely wanted to say Hideki. I think this is a really nice spot for Hideki to get himself potentially across the finish line. But I'll go with Oberg. He seems to be the player that my model believes is most primed with the way that he's playing, with the course fit that he has to get himself across the finish line here.
Hey, I would love to see Hideki as the flame guy, like flame on, because then you can show some personality, like hiding behind the flames, because even on the stage, one thing I did notice, Spencer, as we get out of here, the stadium, the podium for the golf was as bleak as ever. Like you got these silver medalists, bronze medalists in other sports celebrating. Yet we got Tommy Fleetwood looking like he's just stolen candy from his grandmother, and Hideki looking like he's let down his entire country with a bronze medal still. Golf is so weird with only one person wins every single week, whereas all these other sports, everyone's so excited for everyone. And it was just like, I just want to get your take on that because it was just fascinating to think about.
Well, Hideki, I felt like from when I watched that press conference in his defense, probably didn't want to talk just because of the language barrier. He kind of just seemed to be sitting there as I felt like he was a kid in school where his head is down and he's like thinking, please do not call on me. Yeah. Have I ever told you the story? I think I may have. I don't know if I've ever told it on air, so I'll probably tell it anyway. But when I went out to the golf tournament and Hideki was out there.
I think as you speak, I'll start remembering.
I think I've told you it, but I'll tell the audience the story very quickly. So a handful of years ago, maybe 2019, 2018, somewhere in that range, I'm sure we could look to see where and when Hideki played in Vegas during this time frame with it. But Hideki was playing and everybody was watching, I want to say Bryson's group at the time. So Hideki was out on his own with playing with good people, but not necessarily playing with all the high-end guys at that moment. And so I started watching, and I was the only person out there actually watching them compete. And so I don't know if I had a bet on Hideki that week. I don't know what it was, but like I gave Hideki a little clap at one point, and he looked over to me and he gave me a nod. And for the next 3 or 4 holes, he walked over outside the ropes and walked with me, and we walked every single hole. And he would look at me and just be like this, and I'd be like, yes. And we said nothing to each other the entire time, other than nodding back and forth. But I thought that was pretty cool of Hideki at that moment. Like he's a chill, down to earth guy, even with the language barrier there. He was like a nice enough guy to come over and just be like, hey, like, thank you for being out here almost without saying those words. So since that moment, I've always had Hideki be one of my favorite players. And that's not necessarily something I've ever told because you just hear the stories about Jason Day and Wyndham Clark and Tony Finau and
Yeah.
all those people. But Hideki seems like a good guy. So I just wanted to tell
Absolutely.
that story.
I think I would have been a more of a Decky fan, Spence, if you. I'm going to pretend like I haven't heard it because I don't think I remember it, and that's quite an epic story. And it's just so genuine. I do think Hideki is very genuine. You're always getting what you get from Hideki, what you get, whereas there's other guys like Kucha and stuff. You never know what, what's going on behind the scenes. But hey, that's neither here nor there. So let's get you out of here after 60 minutes of heat. Spence, thank you. Let's get us out of here. And we'll wrap it up.
We have a lot going on at Rotoballer this week. I will say Matt Kuchar seems like one of the guys that if you played golf with him, after making 50-something million on tour,
54 million, I looked it up
54 million on tour. He seems like the person that would challenge you, Byron, or challenge me to a golf match, take us for every last dollar that we had, and go like, Chuck, sorry I beat you today. Yeah. Like, how unfortunate for you. I have nothing good to say about Matt Kuchar at this moment. Like, the other thing he also did, unfortunately, is he ruined all the model building that I was trying to get done last night. And I'm sitting there, and so I had to wake up earlier today to try to get some of that done. And that was so not needed at the end of the day. So happy to see that Kuchar's not in this tournament this week. You know what the most amazing thing about all of this, though, is? I was thinking about this last night. I mean, I'm sure he's been offered. Like, Kuchar's the prime candidate to go to live.
Yes.
I can't believe Kuchar has not left yet.
I mean, maybe the fact that he's now missed the playoffs for the first time since its existence, he can now rest, hang up his gloves. And I think the reason he took the time to come back this morning was his shot length, Spencer, was a yard closer to the hole this morning. I looked. Like it was 212 and then it was 211 or something. So he cheated this morning and no one knows about it apart from the 5 people that were watching him. So it is what it is. Go to live. We don't really, I mean, he is. Yeah.
I feel like there has to be some sort of a hatred towards Aaron Rai because he just stepped up on the tee box as Rai was about to get into like his swing and just pelted a drive into the middle of nowhere with no regard of who might actually be out there and is looking like he's done nothing wrong with that same oh shucks demeanor that he has at the end of the day. I don't know what he's trying to prove. I know he was saying that he's, it's showing Max that he has the ability to say, I don't want to hit the shots. You have big shots coming up, but look, it's easy to think of a story overnight and come out and give some bullshit remark on the next day.
He's the one. He's got to that age now, Spencer, like where old people steal stuff from stores, and then when they get caught, they're like, "Oh, what is this in my hand? Like why am I holding this? Like I feel like he just ripped a driver and is like, oh, I guess there's people there, maybe. Like I don't know, but I've always enjoyed him until more recently he's starting to push my buttons a little bit. But it is what it is. These guys are all humans after all. So. Hit the like button, folks. Thanks for tuning in. All the description stuff in below. You get all the discounts, all our stuff over there using code SUMMER. Thank you, Spence, for kind of sweating it out with me. I really appreciate you going all the hard ways there. And please, guys, thoughts and prayers for Spencer's AC situation. Let's make sure we get that rocking and rolling so our articles aren't drenched with Vegas sweat. So awesome stuff. We'll catch you guys next week for the BMW Championship.